Hello everyone, we've got John Kennedy on. He's going to do a presentation about Drupal Commerce, Drupal Buy, a group Drupal study disaster. I'm probably saying that all way too quickly because we've got to get into it. John.
Excellent. So the title, Drupal Commerce Group Buy. If you guys don't know what Group Buy is as a concept, you think Groupon or Spreets or any of those companies, they're on Group Buy websites. It's all the rage at the moment. Everyone wants one. And so we were asked to do one. It turned out to be a disaster. These three factors could have possibly saved us if we'd done all of them. Proper client expectation management, more careful evaluation of dev modules, and project size estimation, which we probably all had some issues with. Now, this isn't an incredibly technical talk. I talk about evaluation of dev modules from a management perspective. So if you're managing coders, asking them the right questions about the modules they want to use in a production server. And it's not a definite no. You know, sometimes you can use dev modules in production, but you've got to be really careful about how you do it. Here we go. Little disclaimer. Please laugh. It's all we could do at the end of this project. If you love it or hate it, email me. I think there's also a system whereby you can leave feedback. I love feedback, so let me know. Some of the project details are obscured. We have removed names and some details, unfortunately for legal reasons. But you'll see why in a second. So, on a dark and stormy night, when entities were at the bleeding edge of object-oriented Drupal development, which they pretty much still are, Drupal 7 had just gone gold, so you guys know what time that happened last year. A tale of development woe begins. There were no winners. You know, we had a little battle with our client. Neither of us really won, which is really what happens in these cases. But I can tell you how badly we lost. We lost 80 hours of project management time, 160 hours of development time. We managed 3 external developers and 4 months of heartache in between me and my business partner and our coders. Me and my business partner, 2 heads banging against a wall for 4 months. So today's mode, I hate hubris. I hate espousing one particular way of doing things. Our company has a way of doing things. I'm not going to try and teach you about that. But we learnt from our mistakes by implementing systems and thinking about frameworks. So that's how I'm going to explain our lessons to you. But I'll try and keep them within a story, so it's not boring. Here we go. So, yes. Hubris is when you, it's like, yeah, it's pride. Yeah. So basically the goal of this talk, if you all kill 3 projects because of what you've heard today, win. That's what I'm after. Killing projects. Dead, so you don't do them because they're awful. Client expectation management. Direct client communication. Biggest mistake. Our biggest mistake was that we were never in direct contact with the real client. How, you may ask? Because, and I understand what it's like to be an Indian or our offshore developer, we were actually, the client was the sales guy, who was an intermediary who came to us, and there he is. He was a well-branded, seemingly experienced design shop owner. He was sharp, well-dressed, well-versed in tech speak. Didn't know much about Drupal, but he found us on a PHP mailing list, which is usually a good sign, and presented us with an opportunity. Too good to refuse. Misconceptions. That he would act as a technical communication buffer. That he would help us with the technical communication with the client. That he would be an ongoing source of work for us. That he would care about our branding and reputation. The harsh reality is that 2 sets of client priorities, well, there were 2 sets. One was delivered secondhand. His priorities and then the client's priorities. This one is a little bit loaded, but I'm going to talk about this a lot. It's a duplication of our value proposition. So I'll talk about what our value proposition as a company is and how you discover what yours is later. And if you end up with partners who duplicate that, that's a really inefficient way of doing business, especially in Drupal, where the Drupal world's cut up between lots of companies who have lots of different specialties, and sometimes you want to outsource or use other partners to fill those gaps. The best way is to find your value proposition and then complement that with another company with a different value proposition. We didn't do that in this case. Responsibility with no representation. Inevitably in projects, things go wrong. Usually you can go to the client and say, this is why. We had to go to the sales guy, who then went to the invisible client, and we were badly represented. And our brand took the blame. Yeah. His client expectation management was on backwards. He, instead of being a partner, became our client and shoveled blame onto us. This is not necessarily his fault, it's our fault for not understanding him properly and how he worked. But I'm going to start with a story. So the early mock-up disaster. Those of you who use outsourced theming will find this interesting. We contracted a new developer to do the PSD to theme development. So we had the PSDs, and we wanted to turn them into Drupal theme, but that's not our specialty. So we outsourced it. We completely opened up our development process to the sales guy. So he had access to our test servers, our code, everything. We wanted to be really open and showing exactly what was going on. The first week, the Indian developers gave us a flat HTML template, but pixel perfect. It looked exactly like the PSD. So we uploaded it, and the sales guy saw it, and he showed the client, which is it's a great way to start internally, but the client was ecstatic. They decided the site was nearly done. And there's only a couple of pages to go, because it was only the front page, and that's a fail. For obvious reasons. There was heaps to go. So that's the first story, and I won't talk too much about it, because I'll talk about the lessons about that later. And it's all about client expectation management. This is the second story. No good deed goes unpunished. The hosting solution. The production server, which the sales guy had organized, was a shared host. It was old versions of LAMP. It was in the US. It was slow. For those of you non-technical, this is a really bad idea for Drupal. No Varnish, no Memcache, no APC. For those guys who are sysadmins, you'll know how terrible that can be. So the site was meant to be an e-commerce group buyer site, which I said before, with credit card processing in the site. That means it had to be PCI compliant. Projected 4,000 sales on the first day because they were selling tickets to an event that had to all be sold, like on this launch date. So we recommended a new server. And the sales guy insisted on using a particular VPS solution. And we offered our installation services at our normal development rate. The sales guy accepted by email, which you would think would be enough, but it wasn't. We installed the complex LAMP setup on a RHEL 5 server. This is stuff we do all the time, so we didn't think too much about it. Bespoke access and security, as I said, PCI compliance. He needed access because we were keeping our process open on the production server. Optimized it for Drupal, and we forgot about it. When we included it on an invoice, he was outraged. We heard things like, "You suggested it, and I thought you only meant a longer schedule for the project, and it should have been included in the project price." Is this an expectation management fail? We were self-doubting. Did he live in a reality distortion field? Or did we not engage in adequate client expectation management? In this case, as I said, we do it all the time. Usually people would charge a lot for it, but it only takes us a few hours. So we just took it on the chin. And the lessons we learned are formally quote for side projects, invoice side project early, and insist on production server specifications very early. Not the dev code. Third story. Near the middle of the project, the sales guy put some pressure on us, got a third-party developer to pronounce our code unfit for production. He had the developer, who wasn't a part of our team, someone completely separate, log into the test server, look at our code, to tell him that it was unfit. We could have told him this. It was testing code. It was on a development server. We hadn't put in any of the documentation properly, or we hadn't actually finished the code. He was vexatious and hinting at litigious, and it was really just to put us under pressure. He wanted some extra features we didn't have in the quote. He was saying, well, this isn't good enough anyway. So he used this to put us under pressure. At the time, we laughed it off because, you're crazy. This is a development server. And we know in the end, later on, found out that the developer who examined it didn't even get paid. Anyway, it was at this point that we should have switched from expectation management to a hospital pass. And I'll talk about what that means later. Expectation management works, believe it or not, except with a sales guy. But it does work. Bad news delivery should look like this. It should look like it has a half-life, like a nuclear delay. nuclear decay. Give bad news early. One of the examples is we want money for the job you've asked us to do. It's going to cost you more than you thought, and here's why. And before we start, I want that deposit in the account. That's bad news, and you give it really early. If you're thinking about the project as a phrase, and the kind of message they receive through the project, it could go something like, the bad news is that it's going to cost you more than you expected, and a bunch of unexpected setbacks will occur because of the scope misinterpretation and expectation mismatches between our company and yours, which will blow out the schedule. The good news is that we've created something we can both be proud of, which includes brilliant features. You can see we give really good news at the end. And in this project, this is what it looked like. Wrong way. We ended up with more bad news later because we didn't give all the bad news early. In the beginning, in general, a client is relaxed. It always seems a shame to spoil that. But they rarely have realistic expectations. They need to be tamed for the trickier issues which are going to occur when you actually realize what you're doing. And this time, it is this time, early project, that you can sort out the low-hanging fruit from the sales guy. Anyway, if there is no bad news, great. But we run through a bit of a checklist. Did they pay the deposit early? This is a key indicator of whether they're going to be a good client. Are they treating your technical suggestions with respect? Do they use the server you asked for, the payment processor you ask? Are they quick to answer your questions over email? Are any of the specification details they give you after the quote unrealistic? We'll get back to that. And if you can think of any other ones you guys really like to get from a client, email me, because I love these. I love to know how we pick bad clients, because how you do well in your business is you pick the good clients and you run with them. So a big part of that is killing off the bad ones. Mid-project bad news. If the project's not hitting your development targets, tell your client. You'll have a better idea of the real development time by that time. If it's because of their scope creep, then you've probably got enough evidence to requote. And if you requote and they want to terminate because of the changed quote, if it's that bad, not usually, but if it is, see our early termination clauses. You should have progress payments, and you should pro rata if they want to terminate. And we have them set in stone in our contracts now. End project bad news is the worst. The clients remember it bitterly, and it makes you look the most unprofessional, and it makes it really tempting for the client to wiggle out of the final payment, which is goodbye profit margin. It's a bit sad. The exceptions possibly to that are major changes at the end of the project, and in that case, requote. Next story is about just this. End of the project, or near the end of the project, we thought we'd learnt our lesson. We were determined to handle any more change requests by the book, requote, reschedule, under promise. And then, I'll tell you a little bit about it. The original spec called for a completely integrated SOAP solution. So what that means for those untechnical people is that all the communications happens between the servers. You put in your credit card details on the client side, and then it talks to the payment processor directly, rather than going to the payment processor's site. Like PayPal, you often get redirected. This isn't that. This is where you put your credit card details on the page, and then SOAP talks to the other server. We suggested a payment processor. They decided on a different one. That was fine. There was no existing Drupal Commerce integration, so we were going to build a custom one. And asking for testing access to the processor is tricky when the client doesn't know your name. We eventually got around that when we obtained a developer account from the processor. That was all fine. The integration was working brilliantly when their bank decided they would only allow a merchant account if they used a hosted solution. This is a common thing with banks. They want the extra security of running on the payment processor for the credit card entry. They don't want you to have to comply with PCI. But this change request came in 2 weeks before delivery. We had a whole bunch of development still to do. We had testing scheduled for the last 3 days of the project and then after that, but our delivery date was set because there had been other change in the scope. The sales guy told us to put everything on hold. Once again, his priority, not necessarily the client's priority, and to get this done. Oh, I went back one. There we go. So we requoted, we rescheduled, blowing out our launch date. We clarified that they wanted a hosted solution based on a post redirect. So for those of you guys who understand that, We clarified what hosted and post and redirect meant, and the sales guy agreed to the quote and assured us that that was what they needed.
Can I just clarify?
Yo.
So you've just blown out all the SOAP, all the payment process integration.
Gun. Yep. So we completed the solution, proudly showed the sales guy. He was pleased and took the solution to the invisible client. They were not pleased. Once again, reverse client expectation management was working against us. They had not been told that there would be a redirect. They wanted all the magic to happen on their client site. And at first, the sales guy was apologetic. Then he insisted that we should have implemented the hosted solution as a frame. At this point, we knew he lived in a reality distortion field. We're generally against frames, but it was late in the project and we wanted to get paid. So we implemented, we invoiced, and we waited. And we'll talk about what happened later. Living on the dev, next section. This is a little bit more technically focused, and it talks about how to evaluate whether development modules are worth using in a production environment, and the mistakes we made in this case. Disclaimer, this is not a dig at Drupal Commerce. Love Drupal Commerce. They're awesome guys. Met Ryan, they're really responsive. I've been to their offices, really cool. This is criticism of our evaluation of particular dev modules, which were required for DC 1.0 when it was released. They still had reliance on dev modules. So yeah, our evaluation of those wasn't awesome. Why we picked Drupal Commerce, shortest way to object-oriented cart, which we really wanted for extra customizability through the API. We met the DC guys, as I said, and thought they were awesome. We were planning heaps of other e-commerce projects and group buy projects, so we wanted to create a solution that we can implement again and again and again, clinging to an upgrade path that was going to be sailing up into the sky. The plan. The cart was a very heavy interface. So for group buy, there's a whole bunch of things in the cart that usually aren't for e-commerce. So we knew that there'd be a lot of theming work. We planned a data model and handed it over to the themers, thinking that these development modules would catch up. The release schedules were soon to get to betas, and we wanted to do more of our dev work when they'd solidified a little bit more. So we scheduled our development later instead of picking up the modules and playing with them early, which was a bad plan. So DC, you know, I said that. But Drupal Commerce relied on the dev version of views, which lacked good defaulting reporting defaults. So what that means is in views, you guys may have heard earlier, or you may know this anyway, you can either have use Views UI to create your reporting, or the module can set up defaults for you. Now, really obvious case for Drupal Commerce, they should have good defaults for the views because e-commerce sites need some really basic statistics. Every single one of them does. They didn't have them set up at this point. A lot of early modules, when they're still in development or they're recently released, won't have completed their views integration, and this can be a real problem when you're implementing. It's something to think about and check up on, because you end up having to either use Views UI, which is generally not a complete way to do all the kind of reporting, or you have to use API, which can be a real trick. Every group buy site needs to know how many sales have been made for a particular deal. And this wasn't even in the reporting. It's just for a particular deal. Now, there may be better ways to do this now. At the time, we looked it up. We looked all online. While we were doing this, the Views 3 interface changed 3 times while we were developing for this project. DevViews came out with its own set of unreported bugs, which we were sorting through at the time. The rock was there's no obvious way to aggregate the number of completed orders for a particular product, and the hard place was creating a whole custom reporting module would have taken a long time. So we found a post on Drupal.org describing exactly the same problem. Other people were having our problem. Great. That means we're on the right track, kind of. So Ryan had acknowledged this, but was not ready with an answer. So we posted a possible solution. I conceptually suggested a solution online. Immediately, 3 people were onto us. They were like, we need this done. We need this done really quickly because we need the same functionality. So our compromise was to create a very simple custom field attached to the product entity which tracked sales against that particular product. And that was a pretty quick solution. We published the model. It's not a definitive solution. The process that was most valuable, though, and this is what I want you to get out of this, is the interaction we had with those other companies. What they let us know is what the module needed to be in a general sense rather than just our sense. And that helps you be more productive for the community. Because if you make a module just for you, sometimes it misses the general mark. a more general module can always cover off on more specific cases, or should be able to be, whereas a specific one sometimes never gets to go to the version where it gets published properly. It always stays in sandbox because it's not a proper module. The lesson, we thought we could rely on newly stable DC because it was released and we knew when it was going to be released. We did not check up on its dependencies properly. So that's research that you have to do when you're going to use a new module. And we need to fully research the other weaknesses such as views. So our new decision framework for evaluating modules is, are we building for reproducibility? In this case, I'll talk about in this case in a second. Is the module a more general form of the functionality we need? This is someone else's module. Do we need to build a sub-module under that? Was it fully exposed? Is it fully exposed to views with good defaults? Is it entity-driven, which all new modules should be? Who is developing it? Have we tried it out? How frequent are the releases? How much documentation is inside the code, which in DC is really good? How much is outside the code, which in DC is terrible? There's really not good manuals yet, and there definitely wasn't then. Even the FAQs weren't quite up there on how you created good views and good reporting and all those other things which you need to do. Even the initial setup, they wanted to use their installation profile instead of having a good step through how you set up DC. The group by project did require reproducibility because we did want to have other group by sites. Drupal Commerce is a general purpose commerce framework, which is a superset of group by, so it was a good choice. We did end up needing a submodule, that was the field. We didn't know until the schedule was pushed, which wasn't so good. Views is not well integrated at the time. We didn't investigate it properly. DC is entity-driven, which is important for our customization plans. We knew the guys developing it, which is really important. If you know they're responsive, if you know they're a good company, that's a really good thing. We had tried it out only in very basic use cases. This is a really bad idea. We should have tried it out more in real testing circumstances and not waited to do that testing and put it off. The releases were frequent, which is great. DC releases all the time. That's a really good sign. The documentation was not thorough. Would I use it again? Absolutely. It would have worked fine if I'd answered those questions first. And that's why those questions are important. I think everyone has a list, but our process was building that list. Dev module pros, grouping onto an active development path, which I said. A more active and relevant training for your staff. Like we picked DC because we know it's going places, and we're going to use it again. And so we wanted our people to have training with DC. Active communication in the community. Dev modules tend to be really active, have good communities surrounding them. Developers are often reachable. Certainly Ryan is on the forum, and you can contribute, which is a good thing in the Drupal community. Problems: views integration is rarely completed, bugs are often unreported, and you can't control the design decisions like you can if you're building your own custom module. You guys probably all know that. That's just a summary. Project size this is the third and final stage. Okay, we're doing okay. The final straw and other straws. So, back in early bad news, I asked, are there any specification details given after the quote that are unrealistic? The answer to this question was the project's final undoing. When we quoted, we'd been given a target price by the sales guy. So we wrote the quote, the requirement spec, according to how much money he wanted to spend, as heaps of people do. We made assumptions. Ask me, you and me. Bad plan. Late specifications are given all the time, and they're usually negotiable. Everyone gives you things they want the website to look like after you've quoted. Usually should be able to deal with this. At the time of the quote, the sales guy said he would have PSDs for us going forward, which is great. We love style guides. When we first saw them, we knew that they were beyond the specifications which we had given him. They did things which we hadn't put in the spec. But we knew we were pretty close, so at the time we didn't rattle about it. When he demanded the front page be pixel perfect to the PSDs, we were like, okay, our fault because of the early mock-up mistake. But then he demanded style matching for the back-end Drupal Commerce admin interface, which wasn't even public-facing, and we had serious reservations. We explained that Drupal's strengths are in layout, flexibility, and active content, and if we locked it into this particular pixel perfect theme, you'd actually lose out on that. It'd be hard to customize later. We had functionally completed the project. This would require 10 extra pages of theming, which aren't our specialty, so we'd have to outsource. And at this point, our attitude changed. There are other stories I could tell you within the project, but you can get the general theme. How his process. And that really happened all through the project. So at this point we said, look, we need the invoices paid, especially for the side projects and the work up to this point before we go ahead and do this other change, which you're asking for again. That's where the journey ended. So I can't really tell you heaps what will be happening behind then for legal reasons, but you kind of know the punchline anyway, which I said before. Appropriate expectations. So as I said before, this is not how everyone should do it, but we built up some expectations that we try to tell clients if their projects are in certain ranges. So if they're under $10,000, we still need a minimum of 3 payments. We get a deposit, mid-project payment and a final payment. If they're over that, more payments because you still want people to be paying in chunks. The SLA, if it's a small project, we don't want to have to, because you'll get clients, even in small projects, sometimes especially in small projects, who bug you all the time. You've got to tell them that this is a small project and their SLA can't be instant. It can't be Sunday at 10 p.m. and they can't have an answer by 11 p.m. Just because it's not worth your time if it's that kind of client. Review opportunities. Transparency is great, but sometimes with some clients you need to restrict the times they look at the product. One of the slides I took out is called the golden rule. One of my friends, his golden rule is never show the client the software until it's done. Yeah. Not quite my philosophy, but I think until the project is big, formal reviews, but limit them. Anyway, quote based on expectations. Sometimes people come to us with a budget in their head. Often, I think you'll get that. And sometimes it has to be turned around. Adjusting quotes for a project with high expectations is reasonable as an expert. You're the expert. You know what they're talking about better than they do because they're asking for specifications which are turning into tech requirements. And demanding clients will ask you for everything possible along that spec. So you've got to estimate for that. Is the client saying, on the two ends of the spectrum, are they saying, do it the right way, which means they're a perfectionist, or we need to do it work from budget, which means get it done, do it the way which is default. Two different types of clients. An example is a recent consulting quote. One of our services we provide is for Atlassian Consulting. If you guys know Atlassian, they're a really awesome company who does software for developers. And we do some work on that, doing installs and this kind of thing. Our original price to just to basic install is $400. It's nothing. We go in, it takes a couple of hours. But we talked to the client and realized that for this install, they were going to need a whole lot of other features, which they hadn't talked to us. They said some things, and then we re-quoted them at $2,200. And they took it really well, because it's early bad news. And this was based on what we knew their expectation would be. It's an example, probably not perfect, but I think you get the idea about basing your quotes on the expectations you find from them. The food chain. So it's really important. Value analysis, what I was talking about earlier. One of our biggest lessons is find your value. In this case, the value analysis, the partner, sales guy, considered himself a sales guy, a project manager, a reviewer, and a mock-up creator. Our values, or the things we're good at, are sales, project management, technical communication, reviewing, data modeling, and business logic coding, and hosting. And all we were really lacking at the time was mock-up PSD design and PSD to theme development. So in that analysis, he was taking more dollars than warranted his position because there was massive duplication in the value that we're providing. A lot of the things he was doing, we were doing as well, except it was happening twice. That's a really bad plan. Duplication actually even creates more errors, especially when there's an invisible client. If we had thought of him as a partner rather than a client and done this analysis, we probably wouldn't have picked him as a partner. He promised us a stream of ongoing work. What we realized is that we didn't want any of it ever. We sell, but he had sold. We have a good default interface in DC backend. He demanded something else. We host. He didn't want our hosting. We accepted him as a client based on ephemeral outcomes of reputation and more sales. We had a core value crisis. So I guess the questions to ask, once again, I don't want to be too preachy, but ask yourself to define your value proposition. Do you sell well? Do you create mock-ups well? Do you theme well? Is your business logic and coding, is that your value? Do you host? Do you manage projects well? All of these can be outsourced. All of these can be provided by other people, especially in this community. We're all linked up really tightly. We know what each other does. and they're great people to work with. And you can either hire your gap or you can outsource your gap. And maybe the things you think about with that decision are, with an outsourcing company, are they complementary to your value proposition, which is what we didn't examine properly with him. Are they charging appropriately? Do they deliver on it in a timely fashion? Can you rely on them in a crisis? This never comes up, but eventually it does. And then you've got to know, because they can be either a massive support who gets you through that, or they can be the crisis. Can they communicate technically and professionally? People in other countries can't necessarily speak English, and that doesn't necessarily matter. As long as they have good professional technical communication, good English is not the prerequisite. And Australia versus India, or Australia versus offshore, there are things which are really good managed in Australia or in your local country, like if you want to outsource your project management, if you want some other company to manage the clients for you and you just to do the development, that's good in Australia. There are heaps of other things you can do offshore which provide lots of value. Excuses I've heard from outsourcing providers. The programmer responsible for your project is on his deathbed. So why wasn't anybody else on the project? We've been busy with other projects, which is completely ridiculous because, of course, you're going to be. We're busy with other projects, but we schedule. No one works during Diwali, or Hanukkah, or Christmas, or New Year's, or Australia Day. Yeah, bad excuse. And we didn't understand your specification, which is maybe your fault, but if they're a good outsourcing partner, they will hound you for the proper specification, and our good partners have done that. Options. No resort should be the last. Chuck us the ball. We have now a list of alternate developers who can take projects. If we examine a spec and we go, okay, this is not our core value, we can hand it on. Or later on in the project, we make sure we develop for a smooth transition so that if we need to move the project on, if it gets too big for our company or if it gets into another field, then we make sure that our code is really easily moved to someone else. Some people develop for lock-in. It's only useful in the wild, wild west with problem clients, and we try to avoid both now. So we don't ever develop for lock-in anymore. The hospital pass. Yeah, he enjoys it. Find a partner who can manage late-stage problem clients. If you can pass a project to someone, it's infinitely better than the other way. If you can say, we have this other guy, you know, we're going to keep some of the money, but you're going to give some of the money to this guy, and you can move those clients on who aren't necessarily bad people, but the relationship has just suffered too much. If you've got a non-backstabbing, high-quoting company who knows how to be the last port of calls and have good legals, they've dealt with problem clients before, it's an excellent solution. In the end, we failed at client expectation management. There's two sides to it. One is managing their expectations, but also realizing when their expectations are over the top and crazy and you need to move them on from the perspective of our company. We hit all of the project requirements down to the lowest specification, and he still got litigious. Early in the project, we should have realized that it would be a liability eliminating exercise because of who he was, and since then, we've heard horror stories about him. So fight or flight. We sought legal advice, we did the equation, we took heart, we settled, and we rejoiced. We got out, and we had a lot of good lessons. So, I realized it was a little rushed, but when I did the rehearsal, it was an hour long, so I don't know if we've got any time. Awesome. So if you guys have any questions, email me. I don't want to answer any questions.
People talk about the 80-20 rule in business, and as a Drupal contractor, you know, a lot of agencies kind of...
Better repeat it, yeah.
A lot of agencies do actually operate like this sales guy, except since they're the ones putting out the capital, they take the loss when they cut corners too hard.
Yeah.
And it seems like the same lesson is taught over and over again, but never learnt.
Yeah. And I guess our answer to that is the value proposition. Is if you're going to, like, if you're the contractor, make sure that you're working with a company who does what you don't. And I think those relationships that you build, we've built excellent outsourcing relationships, but they're the ones where they're doing what we don't really well, like themers. They're great. If they're a great themer, we use them all the time, you know. And yeah, 80-20. I have too much more to say about that than what was in there, but I agree. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes. Thanks.